POIOO, no POI. It means that they agree with that characterization in and of itself. Note that the idea that the best thing I can do for myself when a friend of mine or a family member does not agree with my own sort of ideas or my own sort of choices in and of itself is at the point where I cut them off. It's very problematic because what those individuals tend to do is one, they lose the social relationship that they have with these guys in themselves. Notice that human beings are social animals that thrive on the sort of relationship that they build with like other persons around them, which means that the only way that they can relate with other persons' ideologies and choices, the only way that they can, as a world where they understand that their choices and their opinions is not the number one and it's not the most important, especially when they are not relating with just themselves, but are indeed relating with other members of society. What that necessarily means is that they begin to lose like buy-in into, say, for example, creating meaningful relationship for themselves and for their friends and their family. But that does not stop there. The trickle-down effect or the impact is that they inherently cannot maintain any particular reasonable relationship when it comes to, say, for example, their career, because the sort of ideology they project is that they are the most important person in the room. The point where they get to the workplace and like any particular person, or say, for example, their boss, inherently does not like align with their own sort of choices or ideology, they are most likely going to say, oh, fuck you with your job. I think I'm going to be better somewhere else. And they, it means that they are like to maintain a steady job and a steady income, because at every particular like instant or every particular little disagreement or conflict that they have with anybody, they cut off. I think that the problem in and of itself is inherently like adversely causing harm to this particular individuals in vast majority of instances. But let's talk about the emotional harm and the trauma that they suffer in like the long run and in like in the long run, right? We think there are two things here, right? That what you're most likely going to have is that these guys, when they begin to fall into depression because they have no particular relationship, can't maintain a reasonable job, they most likely are not going to be able to come out of that particular depression, because a world where they cannot have any particular emotional connection to the level where they can maintain a good relationship is one that does not like give them the opportunity to be able to solve like traumatic problems around themselves, because no one in and of itself is available to give them the kind of mental and emotional support that they need, especially when they face conflict in society. Society in and of itself is completing enough to create all of this trauma or individuals in and of itself. But then lastly, we tell you of like family, like like the incentive that these guys are going to lose in like their family setting of itself. Not what people cut off their family members because of conflict, whether it is parents that cut children off or it's the children that cut parents off. Let's say it is parents that cut children off. They either limit the access that these children have to them, which causes like the sort of emotional connection that they are most possibly supposed to have with the children of itself, which means that they do not like play the role of parents to these children in vast majority of instances. That necessarily means that these children are like deprived or like the emotional connect that they need to have with their parents, and most likely raised in a world where they feel like love is only exploitative. But in a world where the children cut the parents off, we think there's a lot of like problems that they could necessarily face, like they miss out on, like, say for example, inheritance that they possibly have to get from their parents. And secondly, they cannot like enjoy parents' love or like relationship with their siblings, or say for example, like family relatives in vast majority of instances. They become a lone wolf that look at the world from a single lens, and that lens is, and most important, if I cannot sustain anymore, I should possibly take my life. And what you most likely have are people that commit suicide and necessarily don't have any particular thing to enjoy proud OG.
Okay, thanks to the Prime Minister, can we now have the Leader of Opposition?
Panel.
My friend, I'm sorry. I can't hear you. You are perfectly audible.
Okay. Is it better now?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Hello.
Yes, I can hear you, my friend. Please start when you're ready.
All right. Sure. Thank you very much. So, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, very important clarity that we are supposed to note in today's debate. What the debate is about. The debate examines whether the rise of cut-off culture, in which whether the rise of cut-off culture, in which individuals actively distance themselves from relationships after conflict, is a beneficial shift in modern society. The focus is on whether cut-off culture empowers individuals to prioritize mental health and protect themselves from potentially harmful or unproductive relationships. Now, panel, characterization of status quo. What does status quo look like? Looks like now where we have prioritized mental health and well-being, where cut-off culture has now become a solution, where people are more educated about how to protect and preserve their mental health and their own emotional challenges and issues, handling them on their own without having to go to therapists. Because panel notes, not everybody can afford therapy as OG preaches. Now, the info slide tells you is able to identify future harms from such toxic people or toxic conflicts after conflict. Now, what conflict you are able to it means that now you have more awareness about your mental health and how to identify things that can be harmful to your mental health in the future. So even as conflicts, you're able to cut these people off and prevent those harms from persisting in the future. After conflict, what does it look like? It looks like after conflict has been settled, or you've identified your differences, you then note that okay, both parties or individuals involved in such conflicts can better work on. Now let's look at instances where nothing happens, there's no conflict, as OG preaches. Even that, people grow, people move from one level of life to another. You realize that the people that you grew up with, or the people that you related to in primary school or junior high school, are not the same people that you still relate to in SHS. So it's completely fine to cut these people off. Can you please hear me? Now, what are the importance of setting boundaries or cutting people off to protect your mental health? It empowers individuals to exercise autonomy over their social circles, and whether cut-off culture represents a healthier approach to managing toxic or non-reciprocal relationships. Our panel, what are my partner is going to do more impact and more analysis on the argument. The lottery of birth. What does the lottery of birth has to do with this? Most people are born into toxic and completely ruthless environments where they do not have the right to decide whether they want to be born into those environments. Cut-off culture gives them the opportunity to cut this people off and go into more serene, more acceptable, more loving, more caring environments where they can be into. He preaches a world where people continue to stay with their families because okay, I have emotional ties to my families. So even if there's toxicity in the family, you still stay there, and that is why people tend to commit suicide. There are lots of kids who have committed suicide in our current world. Only preaches a world where that is persistent. Now, with our world, the social circles that you want to go around, what else did we give you? We told you that freedom and emancipation. Being tied to people emotionally or being connected to people emotionally and still staying there even after conflict, not being able to cut them off is slavery. How is that slavery? That is slavery because OD tells you that, because of the benefits that you get from them, because they make you feel comforted, they make you feel loving in certain situations or certain incentives that you get from them, then they are putting you into slavery as a sort. For somebody to be able to realize that being in that situation, it's a situation where they've been denied the right or freedom to be able to decide to have better situations or better environments for themselves away from that state of slavery. What else do you get from us? Now, OG tells you that, when you are in such situations, you can opt in for therapy. I've already told you that therapy is not something that everybody can afford. Now, OG goes to tell you that, okay, emotional connections are ones that children will be deprived from if children are the ones cutting off their parents. There are children whose parents are dead. They are orphans who have been adopted and they are having loving and caring families. So I don't think that is something that should be really prioritized in today's debate, because if I cut them off and I choose a different family, I still get to decide what I want. What do you get from us? We tell you the panel. Okay. I'm listening. Thank you very much, right? So panel, I've already told you that now there's more education on why people should prioritize their mental health. So people are able to identify when certain issues are going to be toxic to them in the future or even now. So they are able to prevent these things. These are things that I stated in the early stages of my speech. Now, panel, Odi clearly states that we regret the rise. Why is the rise important to us? Because we have more we have more people coming to understand the importance of cut-off culture. We have more people coming to understand the right to be able to decide for themselves when things are not going the way they want it. Now, panel, Gov is supposed to prove beyond measurable doubts that this causes way more harm than good to the people and their well-being and their mental health as they preach. And also, they have to prove beyond measurable doubt that the harms that these cause are continuous and cannot be replenished. Panel, what do you get from our side? We bring you a very important clarity today to today's debate, that the debate examines whether the rise of cut-off culture in which individuals actively distance themselves from relationships after conflict is a beneficial shift in modern society. The focus is on whether cut-off culture empowers individuals to prioritize mental health and protect themselves from potentially harmful or unproductive relationships. Panel, we support the rise of cut-off culture. Thank you.
Thank you to the leader of opposition. Just as a reminder, yourselves and indicate your POI preference. So far, everything is going well. Well done on that. I just want to emphasize that in case we forget it as the round progresses. Thank you to the leader of opposition. Can we now have the deputy leader of proposition?
Chair, could you please confirm that I'm perfectly audible?
Yes, you're very audible, my friend.
Perfect. CEO, have a POI ready. Start timing after I begin my first word. Starting in 3, 2, 1, and go. The biggest reason opening opposition backs themselves to a corner is because they have a false understanding of what Gov Bench is defending. The burden of proof that my prime minister took up is not regretting cut-off culture across the board. It's the rise of cut-off culture that they regretted, which is to say that the impulsive decision making of the people that goes or directly contributes to the cut-off culture, that is what we are choosing to regret. Which is to say, there are two ways closing opposition can take a rank 1 over OG. One, explain that the specific outcomes that have been demonstrated in my PM speech, and as per why, one, the consequences do not matter, or two, why the specific outcomes do not exist to begin with. So if we take OO at their absolute fucking best, if people are killing themselves because they're failing to cut off very toxic, abusive people, even then the delta becomes you have to draw solid comparisons as to what extent, not because of cutting off, but because they're surrounding themselves with these people, or via the delta cutting them off. Where do we draw the line, and where does it become blurry? Pinpointing the delta becomes very important. So the first chunk of expansion that will come from the DPM is one, we don't regret cut-off culture as a whole. We regret the rise of it, which is to say my PM made very clear the people who are going to therapy or having access to great social safety nets or making conscious choices, even without going to psychologists in terms of long-term decision making, they're not contributing to the rise. that is symmetric on both sides, which is to say the people who are oftentimes making hasty decisions without comparing to what extent this decision of cutting off significant people in their life, not just friends, but family members who they have relied on in the past, who significantly affect the quality of life that they have in the present and the actions that they will feel in the future, without putting all of this into accommodation or consideration, making those choices, to what extent we regret the rise of it. Massive chunks of contribution coming from the DPM, starting with one, the principal idea regarding to what extent we can affect your emotional well-being. I think O heavily neglects the people who are cutting off their ability to have access to social safety nets versus people who are not cutting off. Because the people who actually contribute exclusively to the rise of it, these are people who are cutting severe ties with their family or friends, not just because they feel that in general they have significantly been over by them. It's a moment where you feel lonely, it's a moment of isolation, or it's a moment you have a conflict and a discussion, a debate has escalated to an extent where either you have hurt your ego or you have made this choice that for right now it's the right call for me to separate myself from them. But regarding weighing your emotional well-being, to what extent your parents contributed to it, your friends contributed to it in the past in terms of providing you moral support, and to what extent you will need them principally, we believe OO absolutely abandons them. But secondly, in terms of support system, we will not just win this debate based on principles, we'll also win on the pragmatics as well, because there are consequences to cutting them off, starting with the financial implications, which is to say, in point of time, you have to inherit property. Cutting off your family members are very bad decisions, which is to say, even if they have minimal effect negatively on you, in the long term, it does pay off to put up with them, even in the best case scenario of all. But secondly, regarding societal structures, this is not a first world country we're talking about. Across the board, we're trying to convince the judge an average intelligent voter. Meaning, in terms of this debate, the hierarchy is very important. Who are the people who are most vulnerable to not cutting other people off when they should be? I'm basically doing O's work for them just to be fair to closing opposition. Understand, these are the people who don't have access to social safety nets. These are people who exist in a culture where abusive behavior is okay. In a culture where parents can enforce like physical punishment on them if things go off. Like, these are communities where in social media, people can bully you even if they're in your friend circle. They can fat shame you without knowing or understanding the implications of it that has on your mental health, right? Two layers of preemptions for CO. One, in terms of your network system, you lose that as a whole, meaning your ability to climb up the economic ladder. But secondly, in terms of reaching out, your ability to just have someone to listen to you at your most vulnerable, you cut that off as well. Meaning, oftentimes, unless you can prove why this is the point of no return for them and the unfair burden that O pushes regarding people who are at the brink of suicide, they have a 0% probability of taking a rank 1 over opening government. CO your POI.
Of what is the difference between cut-off culture and the rise of it? What does the rise of it look like in your world?
Was I even audible when I was clarifying that people who make conscious choices to cut in terms of prioritizing stakeholders in this debate? If you want to have that debate, good luck with it. But we prioritize the hierarchy in terms of which stakeholders are most relevant to the word choice of this motion, why the CAP considers this motion to be balanced to begin with, right? If we're talking about people who actively know and have an understanding regarding their being abused and they're being fucked over in terms of their mental health, the family members, your close friend circles, these are the people who are most harmful. We concede to that. But realistically, the people who are most relevant to the debate are people who don't have that window of understanding. I'll even be fairer to closing opposition and tell you, when you go to a shop, not everyone will buy a tumble or bar. The most of the people who do buy it is based on impulsive decision making, which is to say the people who actively, consciously knowing the repercussions of cutting someone off, make those choices that symmetric on both sides. But what's asymmetric is our understanding that the impulsive choice or the hasty decision that goes behind what comes with it is the regret of it, and what comes with it and what comes with it is the social stigma and repercussions because of the cultural aspirations I talked about is the social stigma and repercussions of it. Finance, I've already covered. Calculus. The chair should not give this debate to the lower house if they only go for magnitude, because we not only cater to the majority of the people facing similar problems, but also the niche people who might face suicide to begin with. Very, very proud to propose. Thank you.
Hi, is this the DLO? Hello?
Uh, yeah, this is deputy leader of opposition. Can I start?
Yes, you can start.
Okay. I hope I'm audible. So I'll be timing myself for my end. So starting in 3, 2, 1. I think panel, you've not helped from CG, but if there is anything that is going to be ridiculous in today's debate, is going to be from side OG. Because side OG makes an argument on the premise to say that, oh, the argumentation from OO is one that is the extreme violent conflict and things that exist. Then he come back and paint a word of an utopic, like utopic word that literally does not exist. When people totally and always rely on family members, and whenever these family members always have money to the extent that, irrespective of the conflict and the tension that exists within those families, people are always going to regard those financial benefits that they're always going to get from the family in those circumstances, and they exist, and how they exist opt out and opt in mechanism for people to go to therapy and all those things that exist. We think it's very absurd from today's debate to argue that, oh, it can be extremely violent. Then create a world where everybody have a financial assistance from the family or a certain form of assistance that exists within society. I think it's completely useless in today's debate. The best POI that they fought to understand today's debate, especially coming from side like the POI ask, why do you think we've gotten to the one is because dynamic shift in the ideology of what society look like in today's debate, what families look like in today's debate. Because in principle, all that OG is arguing is on the argument on collectivism that exists within society. Even if you are head within society, prioritize the good of society and the good of the family that exists. Those ideology really do not fucking make sense in today's society. People really do not care whether they have money or not, as long as they have that mental health to be okay and say it's for that's the reason why in society.
I'm sorry, guys. I apologize. I've paused you. On my end, you are sounding a bit choppy. It was coming in, coming out. It was not clear. My apologies. I've paused you. You were at 2 minutes. Do you
2 minutes.
remember where you
Okay,
are?
I think I can
Okay.
I can figure out where I was.
Can you repeat the motion? I want to confirm if your sound is better now.
Okay, the motion is this house. Oh, hold on. Hold on a second. Let me get the other phone. A second, please.
Stress, no stress.
Uh, okay. This has with the rise of Katshaza. Am I audible?
Yes, you're quite clear. You're quite clear. So I cut you off at 2 minutes. So you still have about 6 minutes. Sorry, you
Okay.
still have about 5 minutes. Okay. So whenever you are, you do a
Okay.
countdown and you continue from where you were. So when you're ready, you can just countdown.
To people really do not prioritize. Okay, so starting in 3, 2, 1. So like I was saying, because of what we've gotten to in a modern society as at now, people realize the idea of collectivism within society. People will always put this the main important like goal for them to exist. By certain engagement, like a couple of engagement to OG into this debate. So OG said that oh, in their words, the existing for often often for people to go to therapy, for those people to be like get the required measures and things that they need within society. Like a couple of challenges that is that one. My partner already flagged out the argument to say that one. Not everybody will have the resources to be able to go for
itself, because every rise has someone propagating those narratives. Most often than not, these narratives are propagated by three factors in society. Persons like influencers, persons like celebrities, they often spread this narrative. These are people who have money already, they've already succeeded. Most of these influencers and celebrities are already privileged, yet they propagate it. These are people who have cult of followers, they have a lot of content, they are more independent in the vast majority of instances. Medium in which they propagate these narratives are through the mass social media, and now because everyone has access, because they've propagated it through these particular channels, there is now the hegemony of this cut-off media, of this cut-off culture. The hegemony of this narrative is now all over the media. The hegemony and dominance of it has now made it so much so that it's now almost a norm. What that means is that it then forces people into an echo chamber where they think the only solution to protecting their mental health is by not tolerating people, by like with conflicting ideas. I think it's particularly true because most of these influencers and celebs, you see it in their songs that fuck everyone wherever they want to propel that it is through independence that persons can always do other stuff. It is through cutting off people that success, and that it is intertwined with capitalism, saying that there are limited resources, cut off people are useless, locking yourself. They've made this so much so that every other person wants to approximate to that standard that they are setting. Why is it then bad? Because of the nature of the people who receive this narrative. The first group of people who receive these narratives are mostly like minorities. So these minorities are people who necessarily need society to depend on. They need the community they get from society to depend on. But because the rise is so much so that it is now more like a hegemony, it is now more coercing them. It's now the order of the day. It looks like if you are not doing it, it looks like you are not advanced, you are not modern, it looks approximate to it. It is only the rise that forces or coerces people to want to do it. The most times that they do it is when they are given the rise. It means that it even gives them more duress and more pressure to even do it in the vast majority of instances. The second group of people who normally receive this message are privileged people, well-to-do people, because they also have access to media, so they also receive it. Why is it bad? Because these privileged and well-to-do people are persons who have succeeded and are persons who are supposed to now contribute to society, are persons who are now supposed to then make sure that they uplift other persons in society. But because the cut-off narrative is now so high, these persons now cut off other persons. They cut off the minorities that they are even supposed to help. It means that the cut off makes them less likely to help others in terms of becoming more philanthropic. We then think that the rise in the cut-off culture has made it so much so that persons who were supposed to be philanthropic in nature, giving out to society, giving out to other persons, are now persons who are forced to not give because of the rise of the narrative. They just have to follow the norm. If you don't follow the norm, you are seen out an outcast. And because these persons do not want to feel like an outcast, they have succeeded. They want to approximate to their influences and their celebs. Because of that, these persons will not engage in these philanthropies anyway. We've showed you three mechanisms why minorities are at loss with this rise. We then think any rise that oppress minorities in this particular regard should be regretted, and that is one. There is harm to minorities. It does not liberate minorities. What is the counterfactual? Three things. One, we think the counterfactual is just preaching things like dialogue, tolerance. Of is not in the rise. The only time that a person will most likely cut other persons off is when the person like sees it as a last option. It means that it is going to be well thought through. It's going to be rational to do it. The emphasis says you are even at a tension, so you don't do it rationally. There's a clear comparative in our world. The only time you do it is because it is necessary. It's a last option. It means that in our world it's more safer, it's more rational than the comparative that is theirs. But why is this then better in assuring survival of society and societal proliferation? Because of three things. One, panel first framing in this under this argument. One, Human differences and clashes are inevitable because of differences in ideology, culture, and religion. Despite these differences, we have been able to grow and progress and proliferate our society because of three things. One, religion always preaches forgiveness and tolerance. Culture prioritizes community and common goals such as our economy and government are things that always preaches things like cohesion and all those kind of things. In a world with a rise in the cut-off culture, it's a world that is impending for doom because societal progressivism and societal proliferation has always been based on these are differences and all the things I said to you. Up then has a burden to prove how, one, despite the ideological differences in terms of religion, culture, and everything, and the cut-off culture, they have to prove why they will be able to maintain societal progressivism in their world. Because in that world, is necessarily not leading to any societal proliferation. How is the impact of this? We then think that we impact this on the necessity for minorities to build a level of tolerance and enemy in the most instance of fighting against oppression. Minorities always have to come together irrespective of their differences. In a world where cut-off culture is on the high, you do not get any level of communality within persons to come, especially minority, to fight against oppression. It is important because the people who glorify these things are privileged individuals who do not need others to survive. However, the persons receiving those messages are persons who actually are minorities. Most of them are minorities, and they actually need persons and communities to survive. We then think that the discrimination inherent in this narrative, the cherry-picking of this narrative by celebs and those influencers, they cherry-pick it to make it look like it's the only way to succeed. That is why minorities will most likely bandwagon and want to approximate to it. That cherry-picking of it and the rise of it is something that we do not support. We regret it on all levels because it does not bring any utility to these minorities. I'll take your POI.
You have not debated the motion, right? To what extent does the right erode the rationality of humans to not
Guy,
weigh up?
read the info slide. Read the info slide. Guy, you are so boring. Panel, I implore you to read the info slide. The last part of the info slide literally says that the point at which they make the cutoff is when they are at a tension. Read the info slide. Guy, read the info slide before you come and say anything stupid. Like, guy, read the info slide. So, panel, we've been able to tell you the metric, how the rights look like, the propagators, how the receivers look. All OG says was that it is bad because family inheritance is something that you will expect anyway. We fill in all the logical gaps because CO was concerned that who are the propagators? We told you these influencers, these celebs cherry picking it as if it's the only way to
Time,
succeed in this capitalistic world. We then show you all levels why we win the debate. Thank you.
time, time. Thank you very much to them to this, guys. Please do cognizant of the time. That POI was given in protected time. So as soon as speaker started speaking, I ignored it because it's within protected time. Please, guys, monitor the time. You only offer POIs between 1 minute and 6 minutes. Please, guys. Okay, but thank you very much to the member of government. Can we now have the member of opposition? You're perfectly audible. Apologies, my friend. Um, Only OG so far has indicated names. Can the rest of everyone in this debate indicate names? Just go to the chat, debate room 3. Please say your position and your name. It's very important because I need to input your name in the ballot. But you can speak, my friend. You can carry on. Everyone else in the background, please can you put in your names in the chat? So whenever you're ready, member of opposition. Member of opposition, still there? I think that's Cynthia. Cynthia, are you still there? Jackie, where's your partner? Jackie? I'm sorry, guys. Is Cynthia there? Is member of opposition? You are here. Yes, you can start when you're ready, my friend.
Out all the arguments that OG and O have respectively. To that extent, the POIs that like comes from like member speech seeks to question the idea on how these cutoffs like largely work. But within my speech, what I'm going to do is to sort of like impact the debate, but also give you like a retrospective and then just the comparative in general in terms of like responding to a bunch of the things that come from CG. Now, info slide clearly states that this cutoff happens but is not limited to. That means at the point of a fight or after. But as well, it doesn't take away from the explicit explanation of what the rise largely looks like. And I think this is something that was missing from like CG speech. I think one, aside from understanding who propagates the narrative or who propagates the idea on cut-off cultures, we can't take away from why this exists eminently. And I think this is just the comparative before the rise within itself. I think then before the rise, of course, has like less popularization. But this means at a point where individual assessment shows toxicity, the extent to which you have conflict that pushes you to a point that you're unable to control or handle the situation. But also, much more likely, these things occur at a point where this conflict is something that has mounted. That means you can't then claim that individuals are just irrational because they've taken a decision to step out of a situation, a relationship, or even a friendship that has negatively impacted them. Again, the conversation then to that extent can't be that, oh, because of the rise, individuals now can't go to access the other alternatives that exist. We are going to show you why the rise within itself is a reason as to why individuals now have a reason to actually like explore the alternatives that exist to make themselves better. One, we think out of that description of the rise, we can't take away from who propagates these ideologies, who propagates the narrative. But as well, you can't take away from the fact that because of social media that exists within the rise, there is existence of competing narratives, there is existence of things like criticism. That is why the extent to which as a celebrity you harm individuals within society or propagate negativity, there is things like backlash, there is things like call out culture, there is things like criticism. That is why, for instance, Cardi B waking up to rant on social media, abusing fans for criticizing her, largely looks like individuals calling her out. That means to that extent, there is a corrective mechanism that largely exists to create a check and balance for these particular things. Number two, when you say, oh, we think these are like influencers, these are celebrities, and they're like, take away from the essence. I said chat. It doesn't take away from the essence the fact that people find things to relate with these individuals about. That largely looks like Billie Eilish facing mental issues, facing things like identity crisis, still showing individuals, in as much as your environment is toxic, your ability to walk away from it stems from the fact that you're able to recognize. We say to that extent, what the rise does is to create individual ability to recognize toxic spaces. That means now you have better evaluation, that even when you're walking away from a situation because of conflict, you recognize the toxicity that comes with it, how it weighs you down, and the implications that it has on you. To that extent, we are readily willing to defend a world where the people with the platform, the people with the influence, largely impact society to the extent at which individuals are able to self-evaluate and understand when it is that they need the alternatives that CG wants to talk about within the debate. We say that better happens on our side. But again, they want to chat about the idea on progressivity of society and why that doesn't essentially happen. We take this away by showing you why, because of the self-corrective mechanisms that exist and competing narrative, that largely means because of criticisms, because of call-out culture, but because of the impact that you sort of want to create in society, to that extent, that progressivity is still guaranteed because you create an environment of people that are willing to evaluate like situations, that are willing to evaluate their environment, but also what this does is to reinforce a narrative of accountability. And the value for this is that individuals now attach sentiment and value to the relationships that they are more likely going to create with people. Again, if the chat is on how minorities are, like in the vast majority of instances, implicated, the opt-out for you on your side of the house can't be that, oh, these individuals now can all of a sudden access things like therapy that become extremely expensive and the like. Why? Because then what you do on our side of the house with the rise is that you spark discourse that inherently helps these minorities to understand how to navigate within themselves, but also understand that there's a mainstream society through which relatability exists for you to evaluate character and know what it is that you value. But also the essence of individuals being accountable and holding value to the relationships that they have means that you much likely do not want to be toxic to the extent at which you lose people that are vital to you. This means the chat can't be that, oh, a petty conflict has happened and now individuals are going to walk out of that situation. We think that in itself is like a petty argument that you largely need to prove why that is the case within like our side of the house. Inability to show that means that can't be the debate within itself. I think then the chat on like the twofold sort of stakeholders that exist. He says from CG, wealthy people are much more likely going to lose incentive for them to help minorities. They are now going to actively cut them out and philanthropy won't exist. We just want to deconstruct, not even just rebut this. Understand there are various incentives that push people to things like philanthropy. Biggest thing is in terms of societal image, because you need that acceptance as a wealthy person within society. You need that gratification and impact. That is why you have things like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The extent to which things like call outs and the rise of cut-off culture have existed, we've seen more incentive for things like mental health awareness being pushed to areas like the broader third world countries that don't essentially look at this as something vital or something important. I think what this does with the rise is that you push focus to more essential sectors like mental health, and people are actively prioritizing why it is that we should care about these particular things. We think what the rise does is to largely propagate a narrative that inherently creates discourse around things like mental health, why it is vital, and the type of relationships that people
My
have
friend,
to spill over within like society.
my friend, it is exactly 10 minutes past. It's 8 minutes 10 seconds. So you are a minute over. Again, I really do want to emphasize, guys. I stopped writing notes after 7 minutes. So please, can you all be cognizant of the time? I'll repeat for the last time. Can we now have the closing government? Good luck, have fun. Yes, you are.
All right. I'm going to begin my speech. in 3, 2, 1. Panel. Society always have differences because we are not born the same way. We are not born into the same religion. We are not born into the same culture. So it means essentially, society is built on differences in ideologies and cultures and differences in ideas. So it means there is always bound to be some level of clashes based on ideology and culture. A word where there is a right of cut of culture is a word that teaches to you that the moment someone has a difference in ideology with you, the only solution to like protecting your mental health is for you to cut off that particular person instead of things like tolerance, compromises, and things like dialogue that exist without the rise of this particular cut of culture. On our side of the world, cut of culture exists as a last option where we have explored all other options of compromise and dialogue and they haven't worked. That is the only way when we do cut off. The other side of the world and where you have to defend is in a world where you cut off people at the slightest provocation. I think this is where they are trying to run up from the hard line because if we say there is a rise in maybe artificial intelligence, the teams have to always defend a world where students in like high school even uses AI to create essays that they could necessarily just do on their own. That's what the rise on particular thing means that people are going to use this cut of culture at like the smallest and the most little form of like provocation or the most like smallest form of like ideological difference. And that is the word closing opposition and open opposition that adds to defend necessarily. Let's then go into why we think closing operation loses this debate. Number one, I think our first argument is on accountability. We're going to show you how to get more accountability on our side of the word. What call out means on your own side of the word, like you say, oh, more call-outs, there'll be more discussions, and then we can get more progression in society. The problem with that particular argument is that what call-out looks like in your word is a form of like demonization. I.e., when a celebrity comes out, oh, that I'm cutting this particular person off because this particular person does this, and this. And also society like joins that particular celebrity in being able to like demonize that particular person or name that particular person as a bad person. What this means is that people are less likely to like want to like reflect on the things they did because they don't become defensive in a way that continually blames them without hearing their own side of the story. That's how call-out looks like on your own side of the world, and you don't get any form of like accountability in a world where people are not willing to like reflect on their actions because society is already blaming them without hearing their own side of the story. So it means in like the best case, there is a world where people like promote things like tolerance and compromise and dialogue. So it means during dialogue, you could easily reflect on the things that you did because individual. Your own side of the world is a world where people become defensive and are not really even willing to change or become better persons. So it means we get more accountability on our own side of the world on that particular metric. The second argument to go from closing the opposition is on mental health protection. And this is where we take both opening and closing even at their best. The thing is, the type of mental health you get on our side of the differences in society, like in culture, mental health, like advocacy you get on our side of the world is in the world that promotes yourself being able to like protect yourself from these ideological differences rather than leading it to like your mental health. Every single person that clashes with your ideology or like promotes like negative will be more consistent with the reality of this world to always have a more realistic mental health advocacy necessarily. So it means in a world of differences in ideology, people are much more efficient when they have a training that tells them that, oh, this is how to maintain your mental health with people who have different ideology with you. The other side of the world, you continually do mental health advocacy and therapy because you always meet people with different ideology and you'll never be able to get any form of effectiveness and productivity. It looks like an opening operation and closing operation side necessarily. I think the way we win debate over our opening is because of impact. Opening government's most impact are mostly individualistic human like that is how they argue things like, oh, your parents are contributed so much to your life and things like that. What you argue is much more communal, and what that society has always grown and progressed on this kind of like tolerance and compromises despite individual ideologies. In a world where there is rights, is a world where it's necessarily like worse because people are not less like, why is this bad? This is necessarily bad for Muslim minorities because I do not need any form of like help from society.
My friend,
But for
my friend,
minorities, they are already at a disadvantaged state.
but my friend, my friend, my friend, my friend. I'm sorry, A government whip? Can you hear me? Government whip.
Are not able to form compromise with minorities like them. Is in a world where you're not
Gov whip.
able to get out benefit on your own side of the world. I would think that's actually bad for my
Gov whip. Government whip.
Yeah, I can.
Government whip.
I can hear you.
That's so quick. Government whip. My friend, my friend, my friend. Yeah, he has connected with me. My friend, can you? Are you clear? My apologies, my friend. So, I 30 seconds. So there's a long period of time where you are speaking, but you are not audible. Mental health for individuals and how it's better on your side than on opposition side.
Let me just see
Just
for
set
5
your
seconds.
timer at 5.
All right. So am I audible now?
Yes, you're perfectly audible.
All right. So I'll continue in 3, 2, 1. We say we are better able to protect people of mental health because our word is one that is consistent with the reality of the world of of cultural and ideological differences. So it's people are more therapy. The other side of the world is in a world where you always have to go back to therapy because the training you got the first time like has already elapsed when you necessarily just meet another conflict that another like person that conflicts with your ideology and you just have to cut off that person as well. So it means more, like mental health advocacy is much more consistent with the reality of the world where there is like individual like cultural differences. It means our mental health advocacy is directed to like telling people how to maintain and how to like protect themselves even in a world of like individual of cultural and ideological differences and how people can actually just form compromises with these differences and be able to live a better world. We beat our opening because we are able to expand this scope of the debate to not just individual values and benefits, to societal benefits. I.e., we tell you that minorities rely on like this form of like community for them to be able to survive because they already have so much structures in society that are already against them. So it means they need all the help that they can get. Your words in a world where the minority will have to cut up the people that necessarily just have to align with because they do not align with their ideology, and this necessarily just limits their ability for them to be able to survive in a patriarchal, in a like capitalistic world necessarily. But lastly, we show you how majority or like people in power, people who have more money, are not able to help or like pay attention to like people that are like in minorities and like be philanthropic towards them because they always have this cut-off mentalism. So it means whenever these people have different ideologies from them, they just cut them off and are less likely to want to help them. So we expand the scope of the debate better than our opening. We are proud to win from closing government.
Thank you very much to the whip speaker from Closing Government. Can we now have the closing opposition whip speaker to end off this debate? Perfectly audible. Could you please indicate your POI preference? Other than that, you can start whenever you're ready.
I'll take a POI from OG, and when I'm ready, I'll just tell them to shoot their POI. Okay. My preferred pronoun are he, him. All right. I could call me Weep. Okay. Um, yes. Okay. I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to weigh up government benches in 2 clashes: the principled clash and the pragmatic clash, and I'll show you why they lose on those 2 fronts to CO, and show you how come we are better than our opening government or opening opposition. So let's start with the principle of the debate. The first principle of regress that came from CG is that the rise of this particular propaganda from celebrities coerce people to make impulsive and irrational decisions within this particular regard. This principle is bordered on consent. In response to that, like my partner told you, we think that there is a rise in the polarity of propaganda or polarity in the discourse that exists within these particular media spaces. It means very importantly, Sadia or Jordan Peterson would have his own take on relationship. It means that the conflicting effects that this necessarily have does 2 things. It gives people the pictorial effects to weigh up and evaluate the kind of thing they want to go into, but then people are rational to that point to be able to evaluate the pictorial information that is necessarily given to them. But even at best, where this particular influencers try to push off harmful narrative, we think people could call them out, as we see how Andrew State was called out within this particular regard. We don't think all these influencers are immune to call out in the instances to which they're trying to mislead people. What this means is that when it comes to the metric of regret, we have shown to you how this particular harm they identified is repairable, and necessarily they can't win on that front. The principle that came from OG is one that say that these people has invested a lot in you, so it is principally not justified to cut them off within this regard. As a response to this particular thing, we think very importantly that that principle is one-sided, because in a relationship it takes 2 to tango. So the same way you invest in your partner or invest in your friend or invest in your boss or anything, the same way they also invest in you. So we think very importantly that the investment is the metric within this regard, or to a very large extent, the way you work for your boss, the way you more likely relate to your friends and those things, we think the investment is symmetric. It means very importantly that individual needs to prioritize the extent to which they are happy, because the reason they even opt into this particular relationship in the first place is because they want to be happy, and to a very large extent to which the existence and the continuous existence of this particular relationship do not breed happiness, principally justified for them to opt out, right? The next thing to say here is on accountability, right? Which is the next principle that came from our side. We think the outlook generally of how we value relationship, how we value the extent to which we relate to people, and the extent to which we value the continuous companionship we have with them is heavily dependent on the existence of their ability to opt out within this particular regard. Because in a scenario where you know they can't opt out, in a scenario where you know that they would always tolerate you, they would always forgive you, as CG is trying to preach, that is the world where they are not really like more likely leaning towards valuing you or valuing the extent of the harm to which they could do to you, since anyway you always tolerate them and you'd always forgive them within this particular regard. We think the weak response to this is to say that we think it doesn't breed accountability, since people would more likely be defensive and people would more likely not see the harm of their action. We think the argumentation that came from my partner is a holistic, outlook of how people value relationship in the instance to which they have an alternative to pull out in within those particular regard. When as a comparative in your world, you don't have that alternative to pull out, since your alternative is always forgiveness and tolerance. We don't see how your word more likely breed that accountability in how people value relationship within this particular regard. Let's move to OG's contributions to this. Yeah, we think OG falls short in the clash of accountability. Why? Because OG's word is more toxic. Because the toxic thing my partner talks to you about is that people begin to understand the extent to which relationship to which they are opting out from become very toxic. How do we think OG's word is toxic? Because this is what OG tells you. OG says is that you shouldn't opt out of relationship because the benefits you get from this relationship are huge. So when you shouldn't opt out because of those particular benefits, we think that's very, very toxic. Why? Because you are painting a world where people have no alternative to opt out necessarily because of what the benefits from this particular relationship. But then secondly, you're using the benefit they get from this relationship as a leverage to want to keep them in this particular relationship, especially when they won't see any mechanisms of opt out. The kind of conversation we have, especially with the influencers pushing this particular narrative, are the kind of reason when people begin to have an evaluation about the kind of toxic thing that exists. Meaning, on principle, even if those benefits exist, even if I'm not going to be getting inheritance, insofar as you're mistreating me or I'm not happy in this particular relationship, or I'm always in constant prone to tension and conflict, they think principally we need to opt out. Let's engage the symmetric thing. Yeah, PY. OG, shoot a PY. No, no, no. No. Yes, yes. He and OG shared this weird assumption that people are not rational and they make decision out of impulse. Response. We think this is not true for two reasons. One, we think humans being are political animals, so they crave companionship within this particular regard. But then they are also rational to weigh up the harms to which they could more likely want to opt out or not opt out. It is very importantly that if it comes to a point where someone decides to opt out of a particular relationship, it's because they no longer find happiness in the said relationship. Meaning that the reason they opt out is for happiness, right? Which is the consistent principle that came from our side. Meaning that the ability to evaluate your own happiness within this particular regard is key. The idea and the response from say that this is impulsive isn't a sufficient response to the ability for them to want to opt into this particular happiness in themselves. Unless you're saying that the ability to prioritize your own happiness in any relationship is impulsive. Because with this panel, the reason they opt into this particular relationship is because they want to be happy. Will you term that impulsive as well? No, right? Meaning that they have that like to want to do these things. 3 more seconds, yeah. Meaning that within this particular thing, that OG CG wins, or CEO wins in this response and in this human's principle that exists within our side, we're proud to speak. You would not have to pay me anything.
Thank you for the debate. Please give me about 5 minutes or so. If you did judge in this debate and I mistakenly assumed you were a debater, please do message me. I'm assuming I'm adjudicating this debate alone. So I'll take about 5 minutes to call. I'm assuming this is an open round. I haven't been told closed round.